got 30 seconds to get the attention of your audience. If you can't get the attention of your audience in 30 seconds, that's it. They moved on to something else. They're looking at something else. They're focusing at something else. Because there's so many things that distract people these days from your speech. There are PDAs. There are cell phones. There are iPhones. There are iPods. There are gadgets you don't even know about. People have in their purses, they have in their wallets, they have around them. And if your speech doesn't capture their attention, they're just looking at those things and paying no attention to what you have to say. So you've got 30 seconds. You want to make the most of it. And that means your introduction, the beginning of your speech, has to grab that audience. Pull them right in. You can't pull in your audience in 30 seconds, then there's a problem. You lose them and they're gone for the rest of that speech. Today I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that important 30 seconds. And things you can do to make that 30 seconds count. Things you can do to pull in your audience. One thing, you know you've got a short time, you've got to capture attention. We'll talk about it. And you will learn ways to capture your audience's attention in 30 seconds. You will discover new ways to get that audience to pay attention to what your messages are. Some things you can do that make them sit up and take notice. And when you're talking, you want to make sure what you say is relevant to the audience. So you will learn what the 3 important parts are of making sure your content is relevant, making sure it hits the audience, making sure it focuses in on what the audience needs. And find out more about interconnection. What is interconnection? Why is it so important? Why, if you don't have interconnection and your gestures aren't open, you just lose the audience right off the bat. In these next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about introductions and the importance of introductions. And the idea that the introduction is really what gets your speech going. It's not the heart of your speech. It's not the speech itself. It's that all-important beginning section that pulls your audience in, that gets their attention. Because if you don't get their attention, then you got a problem. Then you have a serious problem. So that's what we'll be talking about. And all too often, beginning speakers, and even some advanced speakers, forget about the introduction. They figure, oh, I'm going to focus on the heart of my speech, the body of my speech. I'll say a couple words to begin, but the real focus is on the speech itself. Remember, if your introduction isn't interesting, get people's attention, and isn't well thought out, carefully built, people won't listen to the speech. In a lot of ways, your introduction is more important than the speech itself. Your introduction sets things up, gets things going, gets people thinking about what's going on. Because automatically people have in their head kind of a thing that says, well, do I care? Doesn't really matter to me. What does it mean to me? Sure, I know you are going to talk up there and you want me to pay attention, but why should I pay attention to you? That's what your introduction will set up. That's what your introduction is about. Making it clear why the audience should even care. Making it clear why it even matters at all to that audience out there. So don't make that common mistake and ignore the introduction. Focus in on your introduction. As you're developing and building your public speaking skills, it's that introduction that sets the stage for everything that happens after it. Working and developing and building that introduction will pay off greatly further on as you develop your speeches. A catchy introduction will get hold of that audience. Because the introductions are so important, we are going to talk about this in much more depth. Go into more of the details. We're going to cover how to capture that audience's attention, how to make sure what you're saying is relevant to the audience, and what sort of things can we do with our body to get the attention of the audience, to get the audience pulled in to our thoughts, pulled into our ideas. We're going to learn all about all of these things right now. When you're speaking, you need to get the attention of the audience. And as mentioned, you have 30 seconds to do it. Now, 30 seconds isn't a lot of time. But if you get the audience's attention focused right at the beginning, it's enough time. And there are different ways you can get that audience's attention focused in on you. One thing you can do is use a startling statement. Something that catches people's attention and gets them thinking. Maybe in a different way than they've ever thought before. I used a startling statement when I began this speech. I said that it takes, in 30 seconds, the person decided whether to focus on you or forget you. You've only got 30 seconds to make your point. Well, that captures the attention. 30 seconds isn't a lot of time. So that startling statement gets you thinking about speaking. Gets you thinking about the speech. It leads you into the speech. Another thing some people like to use are quotes. If you happen to have a great quote, mention that quote at the very beginning. That'll pull people into the speech. There's a quote that Mark Twain says, is that statistics is all about lying. That's not exactly what Mark Twain says. More specifically, he says there's liars, damn liars, and statistics. Well, that gets you thinking about statistics. And what statistics is all about. So it pulls you into the speech. But maybe you want to say darn liars instead. All of this is about getting the audience interested in what you're saying. Another way to do this is to tell a story. You have a story. There's something about a story that pulls us in. If we hear about a story of a person and what they're doing and where they're going and how their life is proceeding, we get pulled into it. Start out with a story and say, when I was 13, I remember growing up and learning more and more every day about how the world worked. I went to school, I got beaten up every day. I learned a little bit about the tough part of the world that way. And I became 14 and 15, and still, it got to be difficult and challenging. Still, the world was tough. By the time I was 18 and I was an adult, I realized that this is the way things are going to be for the rest of their life. Things are tough and challenging. We have to deal with that. Your story will differ, but somehow tell a story that pulls people into what you're saying, that gets people focused on what you're talking about. And that also means being aware of what you're talking about. Certain introductions will go better with certain stories. If you have a speech that's a lot of details, a lot of facts in it, start with statistics. Start with some sort of statistical thing about how perhaps in speaking they say that what we say is only maybe 5 or 10% of the meaning of a speech. And a lot of the speech goes into our gestures, our emphasis on words. That's where the heart of the speech is. If you have different statistics, great. Statistics are great because statistics are things that people can hold on to, get a hold of, and say, aha, that's the way things are, that's truth. And they stick in people's mind. Statistics are a way of sticking in people's mind. In fact, if you search the web and look for statistics, you'll probably find the exact same statistic quoted by hundreds of different people. So many different people, no one knows who first gave out the statistic, but it's there. Remember the power of statistics. And you might want to reference the occasion. Talk about what the situation is. If you're giving a wedding speech, talk about what a great occasion is, what a great situation it is we're having here, how wonderful it is to be with a bride and groom. Many different ways to do it, but capture that audience's attention. You've got 30 seconds to do it. You want to make it count. The next thing you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure whatever you're talking about in your introduction is relevant to your audience. Make sure that your audience and what you're talking about are on the same level. It's great to give a speech. It's a wonderful feeling to get up there and start talking. But if you start talking and you see their eyes kind of glaze over there, sure you catch their attention at the beginning, but after a while they figure out this has nothing to do with them. Makes no matter to them. They just don't care. Then you know that the topic's not relevant. It doesn't matter to your audience. Now that's the danger in any speech. So you want to make sure that you make it clear in the introduction how everything that follows matters to your audience. One thing I did in the beginning of the introduction for this speech was I talked about who should be interested in it and who should not be interested in it. Hopefully, the way I set it up, everybody was interested in it. Everybody's got a job, or they're trying to talk to somebody, or they've gone to a party, or they want to communicate, or they just want to be able to talk. That's perfectly normal. And if you want to talk, you got to learn how to do your introduction, how to get that attention. So I made sure it was relevant. And I did that by focusing on three things. Focusing on the who, on the what, and the why. The first thing is who. When you're setting up the introduction, who are you talking to? In this case, I don't know quite who I'm talking to. Could be talking to anybody. So you want to make this introduction as broad as possible. Make sure it applies to everybody out there. So my who is big. And I know that. Now, in some speeches, your who will be very small. Maybe if you're a business person, it's a client. Maybe it's just somebody you're trying to impress. Maybe the who that you're speaking to is somebody in your family. It'll differ in different speaking situations. Once you got the who down, you say, okay, I know who I'm talking to. Then the next question is, what do I want to get across to them? What is the point that I want to make here? Make sure there's a point. For me, the point I want to make is you've only got 30 seconds to capture people's attention. Here's how to do it. That's my point. That's what I want to talk about. Different people will have different points. Different things they want to say. And that's an important thing. When you're setting up your introduction, make sure you know what it is you're talking about and make it clear to the other people that you're talking to what it is you're talking about. Have you ever had a speech where you hear the introduction and you finish and you think, what in the world is that person talking about? What the heck is going on here? I'm just completely confused. Or you don't know what point they have, or if they have any point. Why are you bothering here listening to this stuff? And that is where things lead. If you don't define what you're talking about, then nobody will know why they should listen. So the who you're talking about, leads to the what. Who you're focusing on leads to what you're focusing on. Once you understand, okay, this is what I'm talking about, the next question is, why should I care? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to me what you're talking about? Why is very important. A lot of your introduction will be about trying to establish that why, trying to connect in with that why. This is why you should care. This is why it matters. Some of the common whys people have are, you ought to do this because it'll make you richer. It'll help you relate better. It'll make you prettier. Now, your speech may be something completely different. This is just an example of whys. Why should you pay attention? Because the audience will benefit in some way. And you want to make it clear how the audience will benefit. So one thing I did in this speech is say, you will learn, you will discover, you will find out. Make it very clear to the audience why they're listening. Why they're listening is because these are all the things they're going to get out of it. Why should I care? This is why. You do those things in your introduction. Take care of the who, which leads to the what, which leads to the why introduction. You pull the audience in. You capture their attention. The next thing is thinking about other ways to capture the audience and make sure you interconnect with the audience. The final thing that we need to do when we're working to get that introduction right is we need to establish a connection with our audience. There needs to be a connection between us and the audience out there. And there's several things we can do to make that connection. One thing that's really, really important to do is to make sure that we're open. Make sure we're open and our gestures are open and include the audience. Something that a lot of speakers do is when they get up in front of people, they get a little bit nervous, get a little bit scared, and maybe they lean back a little bit from the audience. And that pulls you back from the audience. Something also that people can do is they put their hands together. And probably the most common thing people do in some way or another is they put their hands together. They block themselves from the audience. It happens in speakers at all different levels, from beginning speakers to very advanced speakers. They put their hands together and they block off their audience. Now, if you do it a little bit, it's not a big deal. If you're in the middle of something and you're talking to something and you do one of these numbers and then you let it go, that's okay. But if you find yourself talking and you're doing this or you're doing this, the problem is that you're cutting yourself off from the audience. You're actually making yourself more nervous. Because when you put your hands together, there's a tendency to tense up. To really tense up. And then after a while, you're kind of shaking up here. Kind of really nervous. You were sort of nervous before, now you're really nervous. You don't need that. So get those hands apart. What I suggest is just keep your hands holstered at your side. And you don't need your hands, just holster them. Keep them down. And if you do that, you'll find that you are open to your audience. And as you get more comfortable, you'll probably find yourself leaning in to your audience a little bit. And you want to lean into your audience because you want your audience to connect to you. You want your audience to lean forward to hear the things you have to say, so you lean forward into them. It's a natural response. When someone leans forward into us, we have two possibilities. One is to also lean forward. The other is to pull back. Now, if the person is open, friendly, interesting, lean forward, they lean forward, and that interconnection begins to happen. The audience opens up. Another simple thing I mentioned is just keeping your hands open. So when you're in front of people, you're open. And people see that, they say, that's an open person. That's a person I can connect with. You'll notice politicians do this a lot when they're talking. They talk very openly. Maybe they'll bring a dramatic hand out here or a hand over there, but it's always very open. They're careful not to do this type of thing where they cut themselves off from the audience or even turning away. That is a protective gesture. Instead, stay open. It says, I've got nothing to hide here. I'm here to talk to you. And I want to give everything I've got. It also helps you feel more confident. It helps you look more confident up there. All of this helps establish that connection with the audience. As you're developing this connection, you can even step into the audience and step forward a little bit. Talk up here. And then, after a while, you step back. The thing to be careful about is when you step forward, careful how you step back. You want to make sure you're stepping forward, confident, everything's fine, you establish yourself, and then something happens, you step back a little bit. Nothing the matter with that. But when you step into the audience, you don't want to immediately step back. So stepping into the audience is very powerful, very dramatic, but you want to be careful. In the beginning, it's probably just best to stand in a comfortable place from your audience and be open. Keep your hands down at your sides when you don't need to use them. When you do need to use them, have open gestures. So everything is open, people can see what's going on, and everything is open and above board. Careful not to put your hands behind your back, because that just makes people wonder what you're doing back there. They focus on your hands they can't see rather than you and your speech. Your hands at your side, easy, comfortable, relaxed, and use them when you need to gesture. When you're introducing your speech, you only get 30 seconds to make your point. You can't make your point in 30 seconds. If you can't pull your audience into your speech, then that's it. People just stop listening to you. You have to get their attention right from the beginning. It's where it all happens. It's where everything goes down in the speech. Right at the beginning of the speech. Right there. So you get your audience's attention and then you go on with your speech. But it's such a critical point. Such an important point. Everything needs to be absolutely focused. You need to make sure you capture that audience's attention. Many different ways you can do it. You might want to quote something. Quotes can be very, very powerful. Or maybe you have some statistics. You have some facts that you're floating out there that capture people's attention. Some sort of startling statistic. Something that says, wow, I didn't know that. Whatever it is, has to be fast and it has to come on strong. Stories are great. If you start out and you're telling stories, as the story goes through, people get caught up in the story. Then you suddenly stop the story and people want to know what happens next. And they get involved in your speech without even realizing it. If you're going to do a quote, try to do a quote which is interesting, do a quote which involves some sort of thought, research, make sure the quote fits with your speech. Don't just do any quote. Whatever you do, capture that audience's attention. And you know what the audience wants to hear because you're focused on making that introduction relevant. It has to be relevant. And you make it relevant by understanding who is out there in the audience. Who are you talking to? Who are the people out there listening to you? You've got to understand that. Who your audience is. Once you get a sense of who your audience is, then you can start to focus on what exactly are you saying. Who your audience is leads to what you're saying. What is it you're going to be saying out there? And in the introduction, you want to make this kind of aware. You want to be able to say in the introduction you're aware of who the people are and talking about what you're going to be talking about. And then that leads into why. Why should they care? Why does it matter to them? Why is it important? Of course it's important. You want to make sure it's important, but why is it important? All of this needs to be in that introduction. That brief introduction. Capture their attention. Who, what, and why. And then finally, you have to interconnect with the audience. There has to be a connection between you and the audience, and it has to happen like that. If you don't get that interconnection, if you don't connect in with that audience, then they're over here and you're over here, and there's just nothing there. Now it's difficult to get interconnections, but one thing you can do is help with your body. Lean towards your audience. Always a great thing to do. Open up your gestures. So you're open to your audience. Be careful about turning your side to your audience or your back to your audience. Be very careful about crossing your hands in front. Keep the gestures open, keep them widespread, keep them inviting. You have very little time to get the attention of that audience because people have so many different other things they can be doing than listening to you. so many other things. They've got iPhones, they've got regular phones, they've got computers, they've got PDAs, got cell phones, all this stuff going on. And if you don't involve them at the beginning, they're gone. They're out of there. So you capture their attention right at the beginning with something they say, okay, I want to hear more about that. You make sure it's relevant to them. Paying attention to who, what, why. And you interconnect with the audience. You embrace the audience so they feel that you care about them, and then they'll start caring about you. Introductions are powerful things. They're the most important part of your speech. Get that introduction right and you'll have the audience the palm of your hand. Mess up the introduction, there are going to be big problems down the road. So remember, you've only got 30 seconds to capture the audience's attention, get them involved in listening to what you're going to be saying next. Make sure you make those 30 seconds count.